Psalm 24 begins by saying, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And if we're going to do a biblical theology of money and possessions, that's really the starting point, isn't it? That it's not just that God is the maker of the earth. The fact that he is the maker means that he's also the owner of the earth. Everything in it belongs to him. So a biblical theology of money and possessions has to start with God as maker and as owner of everything. And not just money, but possessions. The whole world belongs to God. Now, having said that, as we start to read through the Bible, and we'll break it off into chunks as we do a biblical theology through these videos, we see that God creates everything good and then hands it over to be stewarded by humans. We know very quickly that God's ownership of the whole world is challenged by the humans, and sin is the result. Where God has said one thing, don't do this, don't eat of the tree, humans decide that they're going to be the ones who decide how the world is run, and we fall into sin. Now, the biblical theology of possessions, therefore, starts with not that possessions and money are bad things, but that everything is good, but that human sin in the world has corrupted it. And what you get in the first books of the Bible is this unfolding of how God is going to restore his creation to what he intended it to be. And when he creates the people of God, or saves the people of God and calls Abraham, he calls Abraham to be his person, and he promises him that he will bless him. Then that would include material blessing as well. He's going to give him a land, a place to live. But notice how in the story of the Old Testament that the patriarchs never actually possess the land. They are going to have it by faith. It is going to be their land. And in the end, the point of their covenant relationship with God is that the whole world will be blessed. And that means materially as well as spiritually. They would have understood it as a material blessing. However, they did not achieve that blessing in full in their own lifetimes. Now, when it comes to the issue of money in the start of the Bible, we realize that money itself it's literally only worth the paper it's printed on, because it's just a system to enable the streamlining of the exchange of goods and services and around the world. And so in the early chapters or the early books of the Bible, what you get is a very strong issue of possessions rather than money itself. But let's keep those two things together. Money and possessions go together. And as you unpack the Bible, you see that it's the lure of possessions insofar as they deceive you into thinking that you are a self-made person, or that you are immune from any trouble, or that you can do without God, that is primarily the problem. And that is primarily the problem with money, that it creates this atmosphere around us of self-satisfaction, of being able to control our own destinies and being able to stave off things that otherwise affect people with less than we have. Now, when it comes to the story of salvation in the Old Testament, we see that God's people are saved from slavery in Egypt and taken into the Promised Land. And what happens when they are en route to the Promised Land is that God meets them at Mount Sinai and gives them the law. As we know, the law is designed to show how God's people should live in the Promised Land, but many of the things that they have in the laws that they're given are to do with how they deal with their possessions. And not only that, they are also told that if they behave according to how God wants them to behave and live with him in their hearts and worship him, then he will bless them in material ways. But if they don't, if they run after other gods, more of that later, they will be cursed, and the things that they have loved materially will be taken away from them. But at Sinai, we realize that God's people are not to be accumulators of wealth. They may not say it in very strict terms, but the very fact that they're given a Sabbath day, a day of rest, means that 1/7 of their wealth accumulation is completely taken off their hands. 1/7 of their time is to be spent resting and being content in God. So that automatically sets them below the level of achievement of the nations around them that don't have a Sabbath. And God is saying at that point, you are to trust me. You are to rest in me, knowing that I am your provider. Just as I've saved you, I'm going to keep you. And then in the rest of the laws of the Old Testament, as they're given, you see laws about how we should treat things. There's laws about stealing, there's laws about possessions, there's laws about compensation for things that have been damaged, things like that. There are also laws that say how you should treat foreigners among you, because this idea of being blessed wasn't just for Israel, it was for the whole world. And Israel had to remember that that was the point of it. So they weren't to become people who were consumed by wealth for its own sake. They were to worship God only. So into Israel's very DNA at the start of its rise as a nation is embedded and encoded within it the idea of being satisfied in God. And that is the key central plank to the start of the Old Testament, that God himself is creator, and therefore if he's creator and maker, he is therefore owner, but he has generously allowed people to share in his possessions that he has created, even though they've sinned. And he's looking to bring them back to him and to trust in him and not in their possessions.